If you keep dealing with the same money problems over and over again, the problem usually isn't the setback itself. It's that most people deal with the financial emergency but never fix the part of their system that allowed it to happen in the first place. So a few months later, the same problem shows up again. I'll show you how to spot the weak point underneath the setback so you can stop starting over. The hardest part about repeated money problems isn't always the setback itself. It's realizing you've seen this exact kind of problem before. Maybe it was overspending. Maybe it was an unexpected expense. Maybe it was a month where everything felt under control until one problem knocked the whole plan off track. You recover. You move forward. And then a few months later, you're dealing with another version of the same problem all over again. That's usually the moment people assume they failed. But most of the time, that's not the real issue. What most people assume is that the problem came back because they made a mistake. Maybe they lost focus. Maybe they lacked discipline. Maybe they just weren't consistent enough. But that's usually not what's happening. The real problem is that they solved the visible setback without fixing the weak spot that allowed it in the first place. Think of it like a roof that leaks every time it rains. You can clean up the water, dry the floor, replace damaged furniture. But if the hole in the roof never gets fixed, the next storm creates the same outcome. That's what repeated money problems often are. Not random bad luck. Not proof that you're incapable of making progress. A weak spot in the system that never actually changed. So the real question becomes, how do you figure out what the weak spot actually is? This is the part that changed everything for me. When a setback happens, don't stop at, how do I recover from this? Ask a second question. What made this problem possible in the first place? Because most repeated money problems usually come from one of a few places. Sometimes it's an irregular expense that keeps getting treated like a surprise. Things like insurance, car repairs, school costs, annual fees, or holiday spending. Sometimes it's a missing buffer. There's no margin in the system, so one bad week, one small emergency, or one-off month is enough to throw everything off. Sometimes it's a spending pattern tied to stress, exhaustion, or convenience. Not because you're careless, but because your system doesn't protect you when life gets hard. And sometimes it's simply that the budget only works during calm months. It looks fine on paper, but the moment real life shows up, the whole thing starts breaking down. That's why I want you to stop seeing setbacks as isolated events. Start seeing them as clues. Because the setback itself is rarely the full story. It's usually pointing back to the part of your system that isn't prepared yet. In a minute, I'll show you the simple shift that helped me stop treating every setback like a separate problem and finally start fixing the right thing. For me, one of those weak spots was my car insurance bill. It came every 6 months, and every 6 months it felt like a setback. At first, I treated it like bad timing. Like something that just kept interrupting my progress. But eventually I realized it wasn't bad timing at all. It was a predictable expense that my system wasn't prepared for. The bill itself wasn't the problem. The weak spot was that I had no plan for it between due dates. So instead of scrambling to find the money every time the bill showed up, I started setting money aside every payday. The bill didn't disappear. But the setback did. That's the shift I want you to see. A repeated money problem doesn't always mean you need more discipline. Sometimes it means you need a system that handles predictable pressure before it turns into another reset. The same money problems usually don't keep coming back because you're incapable of making progress. They keep coming back because the weak spot underneath them never actually changed. And once you stop treating every setback like a separate emergency, you can finally start building a system that gets stronger instead of one that keeps resetting. But there's another challenge that makes this harder than it sounds. Because even when people do start fixing the weak spots, real life has a way of testing the system anyway. And that's what we'll talk about next. Because a system that looks strong on a calm month isn't always a system that's ready for real life. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. Think about the last 3 money setbacks you've had. Not just the most recent one, the last 3. Then ask, what category kept showing up? Was it irregular bills? Lack of buffer? Overspending during stressful weeks? A budget that fell apart the second life got messy? If budgeting is the weak spot for you, I actually have a full video called Why Your Budget Falls Apart When Life Gets Busy, and I'll link it in the description. That video will help you build a budget that can handle real life a little better. But finish this video first, because I want you to understand how to identify the weak spot before you start rebuilding the system around it. That way, when you watch that one, you'll know exactly what part of your budget needs the most attention. Next, ask, what protection was missing? Was there money that should have been set aside earlier? Was there a category that needed more room, or a category that didn't exist yet? Was there a habit or pressure point your system wasn't built to handle? That's how you stop starting over. Not by trying harder every time something goes wrong, but by tracing the setback back to the weak spot that made it possible, and fixing that part first. You do not have to overhaul your entire financial life overnight. You just need to identify the part that keeps producing the same problem and start there. The next video isn't ready yet, but if you've ever felt like you were finally making financial progress only to watch it disappear, I'd recommend watching I Was Finally Getting Ahead Financially. So what happened next? Because a lot of people assume earning more money will solve the problem, when the real reason progress stalls is often something they never see coming. If this series is helping you think differently about money, subscribe and stay with us. And if someone else keeps getting pulled back into the same cycle, share this with them too.